The big five are Riesling, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah. This is the wine map of Washington State. The main wine growing area is Columbia Valley, but Woodenville's a big deal too, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Columbia Valley is a big deal because 99% of the wine produced in Washington comes from Columbia Valley. Columbia Valley AVA, it's American Viticultural Area. It's how they define different areas. It's a total of 11 million total acres. So it's a very large area. Because the Cascade Mountains, the mountains between Seattle and Columbia Valley, they create something called a rain shadow. What that does is it prevents all the rain that we associate with Seattle from going over the mountains and crossing into Columbia Valley. So consequently, Seattle might get 38 inches of rain in a year. Columbia Valley averages only 7 inches of rain every year. So all the rivers that run through Columbia Valley are very important because they need the water from those rivers to irrigate their vines. So it's more of a desert area out here. If anybody thinks that Washington State is all Seattle, you're mistaken. The entire eastern part of the state's a whole different environment. Long daylight hours in the summer lead to wines with bright, pure, plush flavors. They're fruity. In my view, a lot of them are fruity without being overbearing, and they don't always have as much tannin as you associate with some of the wines. Hot days and cool nights help create wines with more acidity than other warm weather areas. And the Columbia Valley has a number of subregions. We'll talk a little bit about them. Most value wines just have the Columbia Valley designation. If you have one of the subregions, it's generally a more expensive wines, but here's following are some of the more well-known subregions. First one is Walla Walla. Walla Walla splits. It's one of the few AVAs that goes over 2 states. It leaks down into Oregon as well. Cabernet Sauvignon is the leading grape, but it's also really known for its Syrah, Merlot, and Grenache from Walla Walla. There's an area within Walla Walla called the Rocks District that's considered world-class. They have strong, earthy, savory components. The Syrahs do from there. They're similar to Northern Rhone, but they just sort of have a softer, more velvety mouthfeel, and I don't get as much earth or vegetal components, although those are pretty strong there as well. The wetter areas of Columbia, it's wetter than other areas of Columbia Valley. It's 16 inches of rain a year, but it's still a lot less rain than they get in Seattle. Next is Yakima Valley. It accounts for 1/3 of the wine that comes out of Washington State comes from Yakima. It's Washington's oldest appellation. It's the only place in the state where they make more white varieties than reds. So you'll get a lot of, Rieslings and Chardonnays out of there. Chardonnay followed by Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, Riesling, and Syrah. Although it's not its predominant grape, some of the Yakima Syrahs are extremely highly regarded. They're the most widely planted grapes. They tend to have softer tannin than wines from the rest of the state, and they often sort of have an orange rind component to them, maybe a little bit citrusy, something that's kind of unique about the area. Yakima also has some subregions within it. You'll have Rattlesnake Hills, Snipes Mountain, and Red Mountain. If you want a wine with a little more tannin, it's a little grippier, makes your mouth pucker up a little more, you look to Red Mountain. And then you have Horse Heaven Hills, where the Merlot we're having tonight comes from, and where Lori just got back from. There was a rancher in 1957 who took a look at the landscape and said, boy, this area would be heaven for horses. hence the name Horse Heaven Hills. 25% of the wine produced in the state comes from Horse Heaven Hills. A lot of people just call it HHH for short. You make 2/3 red wine, 1/3 white wine. It's located near the Columbia River, and what that does, it helps mitigate some of the heat, and it also has steep slopes, which gives it a really good aspect, so the grapes really get to ripen because they have the correct angle to the sun and everything. So it's an outstanding place to grow wine. It has some of Washington State's highest rated wines come from there. Wines tend to be made from riper fruit, resulting in red wines that are more fruit forward and softer tannin, and they might have a skosh more alcohol in them occasionally. Mostly known for Merlot, Cabernet, and Riesling. And Columbia Crest, who makes the Horse Heaven Hills wine we're having tonight, has the largest winemaking facility in the state located there. Columbia Crest is owned by Chateau Saint Michel. It's founded in 1968. Chateau Saint Michel makes 60% of the wine produced in Washington. So if you do the math, they make 2% of the wine that's produced, over 2% of the wine that's produced in the United States. If Washington makes 4% of the wine. So it's a huge operation. In addition to Chateau Saint Michel, they produce wines under a number of different labels. They make 14 Hands, Columbia Crest, Born of Fire, Intrinsic, North Star, Red Diamond, Seven Falls, Spring Valley, Two Vines, and several. We talked a little bit about Woodenville. Woodenville is it's a 45-minute drive from downtown Seattle. What a lot of winemakers will do is they'll grow their grapes in the Columbia Valley, and they'll either make their wines or have a tasting room in Woodenville. So a lot of people, when they do wine tasting in Washington State, they just go to Woodenville and they don't drive through the vast area of Washington, which is Columbia Valley. The area is home to more than 130 wineries and tasting rooms. So I know Lori that's probably a day and a half for Lori, but for the rest of us, that's probably a whole trip. So you can do a lot of wine tasting. Incidentally, this picture up here is the Chateau Saint Michel tasting room. And that's Laura and I there. And this is just a typical sign directing you to all kinds of different tasting rooms. Like I said, many of the grapes are grown in Columbia Valley are brought to Woodenville to make into wine. And Chateau Saint Michel started making wine here in 1976, and others followed.